Hello to everyone watching this recording. I'm doing an interview with Robert Bunge, and we're going to just do some questions of kind of about who he is, what academic background he's had, stuff like that. Just like basic questions, kind of get to know him as a professor. The first question, I know as well as start, right? The first question is, what is your academic background? What did you do for school?
I've been in college. Presently, I have a total of 4 master's degrees. My original major was history. Then I took a degree in education, got involved with K-12 teaching for about 20 years. In the 90s, I changed my focus to technology, and I picked up a master's in computing and software systems from the UW. And then about a decade ago, I got an MBA basically because my employer was letting you take the classes for free, so I did. So anyway, I'm seriously overeducated.
Yeah, that is a lot. Well, what was your favorite one to take?
Well, you have to kind of like any of them in order to actually finish the thing off, I guess. I mean, the computer degree was obviously most pertinent to what I'm doing and probably the single most valuable one. But I do like the MBA because there's a lot of cross-fertilization between business and technology. So I guess the 2 most recent ones are most resonant for me right now, but the other ones made sense in the time.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, because that's interesting. Well, then this is kind of so the MBA you got for free, or you were getting it for free because your. I
had to do the classes, right? So it wasn't exactly free, but it wasn't just like submit a form and get the certificate. But
it was like I was saying, what positions in industry have you held? How do you get employed?
Well, okay, so short version of my occupational history. Like I said, I went into K-12 instruction in the mid-'80s. I ended up spending about 20 years in K-12, but in the early 90s, I realized the internet was going to be a thing. So I started out as an aggressive internet hobbyist. And in those days, you didn't need a whole lot of qualifications to get an IT job. So by the mid-'90s, I'd become an IT director for a K-12 school district. I knew like maybe 5% of what I do now about technology. But again, in the 90s, that was a lot. So I spent several years directing networks and tech support for a K-12 district. And then after the dot-com bubble burst, the budget for that went away, and I decided to refocus. That's when I got the master's in computing and software systems with the idea that I would get a job in the community and technical college system. And that's pretty much how it works. So I've been doing adult education in IT since about 2004.
Okay, yeah. So you basically, I see what happened. So you that makes sense. Switched from IT stuff to more IT stuff, but slightly different, a little more knowledgeable second time around.
Yeah. I mean, I've, as my responsibilities have decreased, my knowledge level has increased.
That doesn't sound too good, but I mean, that makes sense, right?
Yeah, sure. I think that's how it usually works.
Yeah, that's great. Well, what led your current position as a teacher? I guess that we kind of already went over that. You were always or you were working for the school and you kind of switched to teaching after that, right?
I mean, I've always been in education on some level or another, but I guess again the key break point is I had about 20 years in K-12, and now I'm working on 15, 16-ish, 17-ish at adult education. So that's been my big shift. But honestly, there's education's education. I mean, you learn how to make lesson plans, for a high school class back in the mid-'80s. Quite a few of those skills are decently transferable into the current world.
Yeah, that makes sense because not a lot has changed, obviously. Well, so we kind of went over this, but what was your first moment of saying like, oh, this is what I want to do computer science? So you said after you saw that the internet was becoming a thing, but what actually made you see that as a becoming?
The exact moment, I don't know, but I mean, look, I was on the World Wide Web before there was any graphics. Those of you on the call, if you want to start looking up stuff to catch the historical references, check out the Lynx browser, Lynx. That was my first web browser. And by the way, that was like the early 90s. In those days, the World Wide Web wasn't even a very big deal. I mean, the killer apps on the internet were things like news groups, Veronica, Archie, WAIS, just a bunch of things that people haven't even heard of before. We were using dial-up to log into a Unix machine. And in the early 90s, the only people on the internet had some affiliation to college. So I always had a finger in the higher ed pie. So I got a student account through some local university. And we were just going insane doing all this text-based stuff on a Unix machine on dial-up with about a 13.3 modem. And that was really high tech. I think the aha experience was once Netscape Navigator launched and you could start seeing color pictures on the internet. I realized there might be some serious education applications. And I kind of saw the handwriting on the wall. And I realized that, tech was going to matter in the education world. And I felt like I wanted to get on the gravy train. Plus, I mean, in the dot-com bubble of the mid-90s, all kinds of people were making a fortune doing really silly business plans. So, like anybody else involved in the gold rush, I was going to just jump in there and try to get something out of it, which, I didn't become a dot-com millionaire or anything like that. But, yeah, I definitely upgraded my skills, and I would definitely attribute my current situation to the fact that I paid a lot of dues as a hobbyist and as an early adopter in the mid 90s. And basically a lot of my IT training has been on the job kinds of stuff. The master's degree with the UW that I started in 2004, that was mostly to get an official credential to validate that I know what I'm doing. Although I certainly learned plenty about computer science and software development by taking that program. So I think it cut both ways. It was both about credentialing and having a piece of paper to prove that I had a certain level, but also it was about, upgrading my skills.
That makes sense. That's always I gotta prove it, I guess, before anyone believes you. But I got a quick question. It's a little bit different. But did you when the dot-com bubble burst, do you ever think, oh man, this is not going to be the thing, or you kind of say, oh, this is just a setback? It was too overvalued anyways. Or do you ever think about changing careers?
No. I mean, the dot-com bubble bursting, that was more of a stock market thing. And in those days, I didn't have much of a stock market position, so it didn't affect me financially at all. And by then I was all in. I mean, I had a 7-year experience with IT, and IT was far more fun for me than, I used to teach developmental math and stuff like that. And, IT was just a better gig, period, as far as I was concerned. So, I realized, though, that when the dot-com bubble burst, there was a phenomenon in the mid 2000s, the 2000 decade. There was a phenomenon then when all the software jobs were being shipped offshore. Globalization was just a full throttle thing in the mid 2000 decade. And I realized as a career-changing U.S. citizen, I had to find a niche that wasn't going to get offshore due to cheaper labor someplace else. So I really concentrated on IT security for about 10 years on the theory that the last thing you're going to ship overseas would be your security function. Plus, I was heavily involved with networking, things like Cisco and, Windows Server and stuff like that. So I'm really more in the sysadmin side of the house than the software development. So if you look at sysadmin and security, I always had a portfolio of skills that were kind of things you would use to run an actual business here. And it didn't depend on some, hot, trending app, so I wasn't really terribly exposed to, the wild ride of the typical kind of dot-com company.
Okay, that kind of makes sense. So you're a little bit more, yeah. And you say, you do enjoy it. It's kind of hard to say, I'm not. This is, obviously you do enjoy computer science and IT and that kind of stuff. Well, this is a little bit a different topic, but what was your favorite class to teach? Is it like the one you're doing now or something in the past? What was the best one?
Well, I like them all. I mean, one that I'm doing right now is I'm teaching the JavaScript class, IT 102, and I get a kick out of that. So, I mean, JavaScript was a hobbyist thing for me in the 90s. So my history with JavaScript is it was always a thing to make fun web pages and interactive, colorful web pages and let users do things and, fill out a form and see things happen. And so, I enjoy teaching that class, and most of the assignments are usually some sort of game or some kind of joke or something, like we do assignments about playing blackjack or the TV game show Let's Make a Deal or something like that. So it's got some entertainment value in it, I mean, I like any IT class to teach is fine, but that one in particular, it's just it has kind of this hobbyist flavor to it from my point of view.
Yeah, I was gonna say I actually like JavaScript. It's fun because, like you said, you can actually see, like I want this to happen. It shows on the screen, not just on the terminal. It's more visual than some other.
Now that's classic JavaScript. What I noticed, by going through the different source materials now is there's been so many changes in JavaScript over the years. It's I'm teaching pretty much your daddy's JavaScript. I'm teaching the same junk that I used back in 1995. With a few minor updates, but then there's been so many versions. There's so much more structure nowadays. And plus JavaScript's all grown up and gotten serious because you can run, like MERN stacks and things and, serious server side, actual production stuff, not just goofy web pages where, you play Pong games or something. But, like I said, it's a beginner class, so I teach the fun stuff.
Well, that's interesting. So if someone was interested in computer science, would you say the first JavaScript one would be the class they should take first if they wanted to see if they would like it?
Well, we've set that up as the no prerequisite beginner class. So that's how things are for us right now. I mean, really, I don't think it's a big deal which language you start with because you've got to start someplace. But just in terms of our progression, the way we have it set up at North, I would say the IT 102 JavaScript is probably the easiest thing going, with the possible exception of IT 161, which is the web authoring class. So those two are probably the place to start on the front end, where it's graphical and colorful and you can get immediate results. And you're not installing heavy duty systems. You're just running it in a browser with native support. So you don't even have to download anything, for your development environment. Not really. Okay. Now, I'm preparing a Python class for winter, which I think is like one step higher. It's still pretty fundamental, but with Python, you got to install Python. And with Python, you can't just like make the results appear on a pretty web page. The results appear on a command line or a text file or something, which is okay, but it's not, it's not as
exactly as visual.
Maybe, although Python's a super useful language and in some ways easier than JavaScript as a language. But in our progression, I think the JavaScript class probably is step one in my view, and the Python class would be a good next step. Java is a perfectly fine language, and I did that a lot at the UW, but Java is way more serious, way more high structure, more moving parts,
that's when we see serious, because that's exactly this thing I felt when I did a Java class. I was like, man, this is serious. Even though the Python one was still serious, but it felt more like more serious, and there was no less fun, which is actually kind of interesting that you said that.
If you want to write your first Hello World program in Java, as I recall, there's about 12 different vocabulary words involved in a one-line Hello World program.
It's pretty easy, not all the other ones, but Java's pretty. It's got its own.
thing. Python is just like print hello world, so it's kind of a little more obvious.
Yeah, exactly. It makes it a little simpler. So that's interesting, and that's a good perspective. But here's the next question: if you had to give one tip to students, like new students, old students, whatever your top tip, what would it be? One tip.
Well, okay. I'll give a perspective, and then you can draw your own conclusions from it. I say that IT is a get-rich-slowly plan. Okay, it's slow and steady wins the race. All right, it's not the kind of thing where some 12-year-old IT genius just walks in the room knowing everything. It's more like learning a foreign language. I make the analogy of, imagine you want to take Mandarin Chinese. So on the first day of class, the teacher throws a dictionary on your desk with 10,000 Chinese characters. You're not going to go home and learn that over the weekend. It's going to take a while. But if you stick to it, sure, you'll learn it. Children learn it in China. It's a learnable thing, but anybody's lying if they say it's easy.
Yeah. So it sounds like just like stick with it. Even though, obviously, like you said, it's not get rich quick, because I feel like a lot of people think computer science is like you learn computer science and all of a sudden you're going to get paid $200,000 a year at a big company, and that's how it goes.
Well, yeah, that's not quite right. It's more of a weird thing like this. It's like you start out with no job, and then you start out like doing like I did, like do portfolio stuff, do demo projects, get paid nothing, volunteer. And then you get your first job and you're going to get a crummy paycheck and you're not going to like your boss all that much and it isn't going to feel wonderful. But there comes a magic moment after 1 year, 2 years, 3 years experience or thereabouts. And all of a sudden it just blows wide open and all of a sudden the industry is throwing money at you. Okay. And I've seen this in my own family. I've had relatives where I've seen this happen from like nowhere to somewhere major pretty quick. I've seen it in my students. I got a student who's 3 years beyond an associate's degree who's juggling multiple offers right now in a very substantial salary range and kind of starting to select preferred lifestyle and things. So what happens is experience is the big differentiator. And nobody has any to begin with. So your big challenge problem as a student is how do you get the experience? So you've got to bootstrap it somehow or another. Like I said, volunteers, portfolios, hackathons, join the computer science club at North, the Google Developer Club, and do a bunch of projects and run events and be seen. And by the way, don't do anything unless it goes on your LinkedIn. Okay, because LinkedIn is where the recruiters are trolling, or actually I should say the recruiters' bots are trolling with AI 24/7. And what happens is as soon as you hit the right level, it's not just one company, it's like all of them all at once because you hit the level, hit the mark. You found today's level of who they care about. So, the thing is, you just have to work in the dark for low wages and not a whole lot of love for maybe a few years. And then all of a sudden, boom, frog becomes a prince, just like that.
That's interesting. I didn't think about that. It makes sense. Like, because obviously they're using pretty similar bots. And so they kind of say, oh, now you've hit the mark and they all want you at once.
Yeah, that's what it is. And the other thing about, look, job search is its own art form. I'm not the best expert. I highly recommend you work with the OCE&E or, the new handshake utility that North has or whatever. Go to meetups, talk to people in the recruiting business, but it's a definite art form. Okay. The days when you'd use we were joking beforehand about using manual typewriters back in the day. There was a time when, to apply for a job, I'd use a manual typewriter to type my resume and to fill out a paper application and so forth. Those days are so far gone at this point. It's all automated. It's all AI driven. So it's all about the keywords that you can get on your documents because some bot is searching for keywords. So if you touch some technology, it goes on your LinkedIn.
Yeah, so put everything you do on your LinkedIn. If it's
every little thing.
LinkedIn, which you could pretty much actually put anything you computer science related on it. I don't see the problem, but you go put it up, make sure to put it on. That's a good tip. So that was the next question. If you could have a tip, but that makes sense as a kind of your answer.
Yeah, well, don't just sit in your basement writing amazing code waiting to be discovered.
Exactly.
Not exactly how it works.
Exactly. Someone's got to see it. Exactly. You can't just write it and then obviously no one's going to say, oh, yeah, this is you're the one of the interesting things though is that's probably is kind of like the amazing developer is that one guy in the basement. And, my dad said this, and I want to know what you think, because I think this is kind of the case. He said before, when it was more, when they were first kind of like really, when the computers first became a thing where you could have a job in it, he said you have these hero programmers, and they would do all the work by themselves. They'd know how to do it. now it's more working on teams. It doesn't really it doesn't really matter how good you are. It's more important how well you can work with a team. Is that kind of true?
Well, I think it is. Now, a couple of years ago, before COVID, I went to a really cool meetup at a software shop up on Capitol Hill. And the discussion that night was full stack developer. Is that what you want to be? Is that who you want? Or do you want to be more specialized? And I guess the consensus from that meetup, and this was a lot of people in the meeting that know 10 times more than I do. So I'm just passing it along. But the consensus was there was a moment around 2005 or thereabouts when full stack developer was what everybody wanted, because they wanted to do a startup company on the cheap. So they wanted somebody that could do all of it, the front end, the back end, the database, the sysadmin. That way you just have like 1 or 2 star coders and boom, you have a startup. And then, you get an investment and everybody cashes a lot of stock in, right? That was 2005. Current thinking is probably, no, you probably want to pick a vertical or two, because it's way more complicated. If you look at modern architectures, there's all kinds of cloud stuff. There's all kinds of serverless stuff. There's all kinds of microservices going on. I mean, I've seen companies' architectures where they've got 20, 30, 40, 50 interactive services, some housed on premises, some housed in the cloud, some multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, mobile apps going on. You got to put it on the iPhone. You got to put it on Android. You don't seriously look for one developer to do all of that personally.
Yeah, that would be crazy. So
to me, that's just nuts.
So it sounds like you say be a little bit more specialized. Don't try to be the full stack amazing programmer.
Well, look, okay, in school, when you're doing our associate's degree and our bachelor's degree, you should touch the full stack. Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, don't imagine you can get out without touching a database, and be any good to anyone. Don't imagine, even if all your web pages are ugly, like mine ugly web pages here, nevertheless, I hope you understand how HTML works. Okay. JavaScript, Python, PHP, Java, C#, Ruby, touch them all, baby. I mean, don't neglect anything. Some people get religious. Windows, Linux, Mac OS. My attitude has always been all of the above, because as an IT director, I had to support all that stuff. I mean, customers have all of it nowadays. So do you want to not make a sale to Mac users? Do you want to not make a sale to Linux users? I mean, just you got to support what's out there, right? So touch every little bit of it while you're in school. But yeah, when it comes time for the job search, you have to kind of decide which foot to put forward. Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense, because it's better to kind of see and also you can tell what you like too, not just what you're best at. It's kind of like, oh, this is the thing I kind of like. I want to do this more, because if you don't try everything, then you're not going to know, right?
Right. Yeah. So sample it all, but then toward the end of your bachelor's program, you need to start thinking. I mean, look, database developers can make a ton of money, but it's a specialized thing. So if you want to work on the database specifically and double down on database, I'd say go for it, because you get paid, but you're living in a particular world if you do that. Likewise, there's room in the world for UX, UI, front-end developers. If you're all about Photoshop and you're all about, images and look and feel, fine, do it. But go after it with discipline and, don't spread yourself too thin. And in terms of like people that get religious about Microsoft versus Oracle versus Java versus C# versus, this stack or that stack, I'm not religious. I'm practical. What I would say is you need to pick one or two, right? But don't
just try to do everything, because it's not really feasible to do that.
Too many languages. Now, look, I'll give you an example. My son's a professional developer, and he did mostly Java because the school did Java, right? When he got his first developer job, it turned out he was using C# more than anything, because that was their stack. If you know Java, you can learn C# in a big hurry. So that wasn't a problem. He's currently working for a company, and I asked him, "What are you doing lately?" He says, "Well, they decided they needed to do some stuff in Go, and nobody on the team had ever touched Go. So I was the newest, so I got elected. So now he's learning Go. So you may think you're going to be this, that, or the other thing, but your employer may have a different idea.
That makes sense.
Now, my attitude about language is if you're a computer science person, you better darn well know how to learn a language. And I don't mean because you take a class. I mean, you better know how to figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's one thing I have to say. When I first was doing computer science before school, I was like, what language should I learn? I spent like weeks trying to figure out the best language. And it kind of after a while, I was like, they're all the same. Like the basic stuff, obviously there's difference when you get more advanced. But if you want to just, especially if you're brand new, they're all very similar. A lot of the basic stuff is very, very similar.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, exactly.
More or less. I mean, your mileage will vary a bit, right? I mean, I'm not going to say that assembly is the same as SQL or something. That'd be nonsense. But
like they're all exactly. Yeah. But obviously, like it's pretty easy to transition if you know how to learn them, then it's easier to learn more. As like you said, that was a good point.
Well, that's exactly it. So like one language learn. I mean, look, I started. The first language I ever coded in was Fortran, and that involved IBM punch cards. You'd hand a deck of punch cards with a rubber band around it to a guy behind the counter and come back in 24 hours and get a printout of your results. Then the 80s, I was teaching BASIC, on the Apple IIe, right? And that was all about subroutines and stuff like that. And, and nobody really uses any of that stuff much. I guess these languages still exist, but they aren't nearly what they once were. But then when it came time to learn internet languages in the 90s, knowing a couple of languages already, it's like variables, functions, if statements, loops. This is not news.
Exactly. Yeah, it's pretty similar. I don't think you should so on your LinkedIn, you probably shouldn't put I know how to use Fortran front and center. That's like your only thing, because that probably wouldn't be the best, right?
Well, I mean, look, if you know it, it can't hurt.
Right? Exactly.
Lord knows who needs to hire you to support some legacy thing. Look,
they would probably pay you a lot of money, though.
There's a serious market for COBOL programmers, okay? Now, COBOL it's not your daddy's language. It's your granddaddy's language. But the thing is, there's all kinds of companies still running COBOL on the mainframe, and they've got serious money tied up in those apps, and they need talent that can support their legacy COBOL apps. So you can get paid if you know COBOL. I mean, if that's who you want to be, go for it. Definitely not the latest thing, but here's the thing that people don't understand about tech. Everybody thinks tech is the chase after the latest and the greatest. That might be true for people like us that are into tech, but typical businesses don't consider upgrading all their tech to be a good thing. They consider it to be an expensive thing. So most businesses that care, remember I have an MBA, right? Most businesses that care about the bottom line would prefer not to upgrade all their stuff all the time. Okay.
It's expensive.
So there's a lot of 20, 30-year-old stuff out there that needs care and feeding. So, if you know those legacy things, I'd say slap it on your LinkedIn, but
might as well, right?
Definitely put the newer news on top.
Oh, yeah, that's good. Well, let's by the way, if anyone has any questions in the chat, you can just ask them, because there's some other people here. But let's go to the next question. Is what is your approach to teaching? Like at least like with Bill's class, for example, like obviously he does a lot of big projects. You have to do a lot of big projects. The tests aren't a super big deal. What do you think what do you think is a better? What do you think the best approach is for you?
Well, okay, Bill's first of all is amazing. Okay,
yeah.
I mean. Bill is great. I hired Bill to come in and work in my program a few years ago, and never made a better choice of somebody that can totally get it done. So much love for Bill. That being said, he and I are stylistically entirely different. I mean, so I am way less structured than Bill is. I'm much more oriented toward the world of startups, hobbyists, meetups, and just generally the classic definition of hacker. Okay, the classic definition of hacker was just somebody that liked to screw around with tech and see what happens. So a lot of my classes are pretty much that. Now, that being said, sure, like in the 102 class, we have some larger projects. I have my daily projects are short and sweet, and they're just basically practice exercises. But yeah, there's some larger projects, and the larger projects have some structure. You need to organize them. You need to comment them. You need to test them. You need to use correct internal documentation. So
But
it ends up kind of in the same place. But stylistically, I'm basically, let's say Bill's more classical and I'm more jazz.
Okay, yeah, that's. I think I haven't taken one of your classes, but that would kind of make sense. You're a little bit more free and just go with just go with the flow more, right?
Yeah, that's more of a personality thing. I'm not going to say my method is superior, and my method is not superior for most people teaching computer science. Most people teaching what I teach have no business trying to do it the way I do. But it's just a style I've evolved, and at this point, I'm gonna go down with it all the way.
Yeah, I feel like teachers are obviously better at teaching certain things their way, and also students. There's a lot of different types of students. Some student who I love this class because it's really like whatever. Some other student, I hate this class for those exact same reasons. It's really impossible to have one teacher who just is the best teacher because it's all students and all teachers are so different.
Yeah, but I'll recommend Bill 1,000%. So take whatever he's given because you won't regret it.
That's good. Well, then there's another kind of slightly related thing, but what is the most important concepts or skills that your students take away from your classes? Like, what do you, at the end of one of your classes, what do you want them to really understand?
Well, okay, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what I teach. It doesn't matter what you major in. If you imagine that everything you need to know about tech you learn in school, you really have it entirely wrong. 99% of what you need to learn about tech, you will learn after you're done with school. So the most critical thing I can help a student with is getting up to the place where they can independently research stuff. I'll give you an example about how I roll, right? So if a student sends me a question, it's some error message you got on a Linux script, right? It's like, what do? I take the error message, I Google it, I go to Stack Exchange, and I find out what 47 other people said about that error message, and then I spit it back to them, and I say, oh, was anything like this going on? In other words, I don't know much, but I know how to look it all up. And that's where students have to get to. You have to get to the place where you don't need somebody to hand you the answers. You need to know how to go out and get the answers, because that's what professional developers do. I mean, there's no way that the school can keep up with all the new tech out there. I mean, it seems like it takes us, 10 years to launch a new degree program or something. By the time it's all approved, the world has moved forward, and we're teaching, yesterday's news. No, I mean, it's not that bad. I mean, stuff like Python ain't going out of style, right? But still, I'm not going to pretend that we're on the bleeding edge of anything. We never will be, right? So if you want to get out there, you have to learn how to go there on your own steam. So that's just it. I on purpose try not to explain everything. On purpose, I leave loose ends because students have to learn how to pick up the thread and tie off their own loose ends.
Oh, that's interesting because I totally agree. Because if you in real life, obviously, I feel like some students come in, especially when in the very beginning classes, when they ask for help, I'm always like, okay, well, first thing is look up on Google, and a lot of them think like that's some like sin, like, oh, I should never look up on Google. I have to think of it myself, but really, that's the best way to learn is to see what other people think, figure out what they're doing, because it's never going to be copy and paste. You're going to have to change it. You have to understand it to really get it.
Yeah. So there's just, look, I'm very practitioner oriented. Like I said, back before COVID, I spent quite a bit of time hanging out in physical meetups around Seattle. In the physical meetup world, you'd go to a talk on something like JavaScript, and it was always in some company. So I've been inside a bunch of pretty cool Seattle area development shops, and I've seen what their work environment is. And I've listened to how developers talk, and I've seen how they demo code and stuff like that. And a lot of my style is patterned after that world, right? I mean, what I have on now would be a pretty decent job interview outfit with a lot of these shops. I mean, if you want to not get hired, throw on a suit and a tie. Because I mean, forget it. Who wants to work with that person, right? But rock some flannel, rock a t-shirt, just make it maybe not obscene. But in terms of just general casualness and informality and not spelling out things in a lectury way, that's on purpose, because that's how the dev world works in Seattle. I mean, nobody's sitting there giving whiteboard lectures to each other. I mean, they're all hacking code, right? And everybody talks in shorthand because everybody knows what it is. If you don't know what it is, then you need to take notes quietly and then go home and look up what it is.
That's a smart idea right there. Just pretend you know until you actually know.
Yeah, fake it till you make it. I guess you wanted my one tip. Okay, fake it till you make it. There is my life advice for everybody.
That's interesting. I mean, I like that. But the little bit. So I heard you said before COVID, obviously, and that's one thing a lot of teachers do differently. But how has online learning impacted your classes? Do you think it's improved it at all, like kind of neutral, or more like negatively affected it a lot?
Well, I dig it because I love not having to commute. The other thing is, in the last 2 years, I've gone heavily into AWS and taught a bunch of cloud stuff. So when you're teaching in the cloud, even if we were all in a room together, guess what? We'd be logging into AWS and we'd be up in the cloud. It turns out you can do cloud demos on Zoom just fine. I mean, it would be pretty simple right now for me to fire up an AWS environment, spin up a server, clone my Git repo, and have a production web server with my application. I could have that going in 5 minutes while it was all being recorded on live video. And I do that kind of stuff routinely. Or the other day I set up a Linux server and I had 20 students coming in via horribly insecure remote access protocols, but it was fun. So we're all on the same server. It was kind of like how we did it back in the 90s, right? But that kind of demo is fine online. So if I ever do go back to a physical class, we're going to be in a computer lab. We're all going to be jacked into the cloud the whole time. Now, I suppose it's kind of handy. I could run around and look behind somebody's back and see what's on their screen and say, oh, you need to type this. That should be capitalized. I can see it right there on your screen. So that would be easier. And some people will relate better to a face-to-face instructor. But, from my point of view, I'm perfectly fine with online all the time. Wouldn't bug me a bit.
Huh, that's interesting because I think certain classes, like obviously computer science, I feel like it's a little bit more fitted, but like other classes like physics is not as well suited for online classes.
No way. I'm not claiming everything in the world should be online. That's online. Nuts.
But, I was only talking about this class because obviously you said
but I mean the stuff I teach, like I say, it's cloud centric. It's code centric. I mean, I think on balance, honestly, student performance would be a bit better, in a physical world. But here's the other deal. Okay, it's like I said, my son's a professional developer working for a major company. He got hired a little over a year ago. He has not once set foot on a physical property of that company. He has not once met, as far as I know, a physical person in that company. His team is distributed all over the US of A. And I closely follow business news about IT, and basically none of the big IT shops, not Google, not Microsoft, not Amazon, not any of them, are in a big hurry to get people back in the physical office 5 days a week. So if you want to be a coder, if you don't know how to work remote, you probably don't know how to work.
Oh yeah, that's good because you said obviously they have to. I'm sure companies really like being able to get their developers from everywhere, not just nearby where they have an office. I assume that's a lot harder.
Well, as the MBA talking now, they figured out that rent costs money.
Exactly.
They figured out they can cut salaries if you move to Kansas or something. And so a lot of them have just done the calculation. They've done the math. Their profits went up during COVID because they found out it's cheaper not to bring everybody into the office every day. Now, yeah, that being said, I think there is advantages to periodic face-to-face meetups. That pendulum will swing back at a certain point, but I don't think it's ever going back to the idea where it used to be just impossible to drive to downtown Seattle Monday through Friday. I mean, you just couldn't physically get there because it was too crowded. I'm not sure it's ever going to be that exact thing again.
Huh? That's interesting. That is, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. For me personally, I feel like COVID has just been for a lot of my classes a lot easier, especially for the computer science ones. I feel like it's really natural. Like you said, you're going to be doing this online anyway. So it's kind of like, if you're going online, you might as well just do it. If you're doing it for school, it's kind of the same. But there's another question. So I'm not sure this question makes a lot of sense, but I kind of am curious about what you've done with AWS. So the question is, what is your experience with AWS, and how do you think most CS students would use it? So obviously, usually you're not just like running AWS for fun, but like, basically kind of what do you think about AWS, and how would you use it in a job or as a student?
Okay. So first of all, I'm not religious about vendors, right? So if you're into Google Cloud or Azure or anything else, go for it. Have fun with that. That's cool. What happened is a couple years ago, AWS made some resources available, and so I've got some excellent free resources for students in AWS. I can put all my students into an AWS account with hands-on, abilities, and they have a very excellent structured curriculum called Cloud Foundations. So I teach that curriculum. I've done it for 2 years now, and I've built my own wraparound curriculum in Canvas to support specifically AWS Cloud Foundations. To me, it's just where it all comes together, because it's the one thing I can take in common between the sysadmin, the security, the Linux, the JavaScript, the GitHub. I mean, all of those classes can participate equally with AWS. Like I said, I could go in there using Linux, spin up a web server. Okay, using command line Git commands, pull my GitHub repo in, and that could be Python, JavaScript, or whatever it happens to be. I could either set it up securely or insecurely, depending on what I'm trying to accomplish, because I'm well versed in firewall rules and how to configure that sort of thing in AWS. So, if you're more on the sysadmin side of the house, you're installing servers, managing servers, checking out log files, backing up stuff. If you're more on the developer side of the house, you just need a platform to host your code, and AWS is absolutely that. So I just think it's great. Plus, I mean, again, the price is right. The student stuff is free. And I can just demo anything that I do. Plus, again, in the Zoom world, it's been great, because it would have been brutal trying to do physical labs when you can't get into the physical building where the equipment is. But if everybody's got a cloud account, we're actually doing hands-on stuff. And, I'm screen sharing, they're screen sharing. So I don't know. To me, it's a pretty good deal. Again, I'm not going to knock Google Cloud or Azure or anybody else, because the skills are pretty transferable. I mean, I just tested Google Cloud last year just because I had something to try out. And basically I found it pretty similar to AWS in terms of the general flavor of things. I'm just sticking with AWS because I've got kind of sort of a situation there where I have a lot invested in that particular platform and a lot of kind of development on that platform. So I'll just keep going with that, until a better value proposition comes along.
So that makes a lot of sense. I didn't really think about that, but obviously, if you're doing AWS, you're kind of doing all sorts of stuff. It kind of hits all the aspects, which I didn't really think about, but that makes sense. That's pretty interesting. That's good. So I have another question for you. This is a little bit more silly, but what other hobbies or interests do you have for besides computer science? Like, what do you like doing besides programming?
Well, lately I put a lot of emphasis on getting out of the house. So hiking, biking, kayaking, gearing up for snowshoeing in the winter. Right now we're at an awkward moment where it's pretty cold and miserable. The snow isn't there yet. So, but I went out and hiked in the rain last weekend up by the White River Valley, right? And I try to get out at least once a week, and on a daily basis, I get out of the house and do something physical, because sitting on a chair in front of a screen doesn't do my old body any favors. So I would recommend to everybody get into some kind of a physical conditioning program and get outdoors somehow or another. Yeah, other than that, that's pretty much it. It's just outdoorsy stuff. And then, if I'm just tired of work, streaming video, of course.
Yeah, I think that's everyone likes that. Do you have any shows that you liked recently?
Well, I watch a lot of stuff. I mean,
Jump around, yeah.
I'm watching Cowboy Bebop right now. It showed up on Netflix. I never saw it in the original run, but that's kind of a cool, very 90s kind of thing. So.
Oh yeah, so looks like we got some questions. But here's one. What is the most fun tech you've learned, like programming language or whatever, like AWS? What's your favorite one?
Well, again, just for the pure fun factor, I have to go with JavaScript. I mean, JavaScript is the one that I feel was my original breakthrough into actually having fun with the tech. Although, honestly, I mean, goodness gracious, I mean, the first time I got a web page to work, I mean, just any difficult program where you install it. I mean, like I was doing some test stuff last year, and I was just anytime I try to install some new server and it actually works, like I get a Django stack going or something, it's like, ooh, good for me. Because some of these things take some doing, right? So anytime you solve a hard tech problem and it clicks, that's always satisfying.
Okay, so that's JavaScript. That makes sense. It's pretty. I think most people would say JavaScript's pretty fun, especially if you're just doing like fun web pages. After you get your web page up, I have to say, after I've got my first web page up and working, like, oh, anyone can go to this. It's very, very satisfying. It's like, oh wow, anyone can just go to this URL and they'll actually see my stuff, which is just a really, really neat thing to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I recommend if you actually have any interest in if you have any interest in programming, I would really recommend trying to start a web page or something because it's pretty fun and very informative.
Well, it's definitely a good idea, right? Plus, remember, you have to have that portfolio. So in today's world, of course, your portfolio is going to be web-based. So, it's really hard to avoid web applications. Even if you're into like mobile apps are basically a different version of a web application, quite honestly.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So yeah, you need to learn web applications, pure and simple. I mean, again, there are people that can do well in programming, doing entirely different things like device programming, electronics programming. I mean, there's a lot of programming verticals nowadays, but I think in general, everybody needs to have some experience with web apps.
That's a good tip because I mean, yeah, you can't avoid it. You're pretty much gonna have to use it. Maybe unless you're doing Fortran, it's some old banking system. Maybe then you could avoid it, but pretty much everyone else, even then.
I mean, again, you got to use web apps to just communicate.
Exactly.
Maybe if you're not writing a web app, you at least need to be familiar with web apps.
How to use it. Yeah. Well, that makes sense. That's neat. Well, here's a question. Someone just asked, what skills do you see being outsourced in the next decade or so? Because you talked about like, oh, I'm going to do security because you thought it wouldn't be outsourced, which is I didn't think about that, but it actually makes a lot of sense. It's actually pretty smart. So did you see any more skills being outsourced?
Well, look, the world's changed. Okay. So like I said, in 2005, companies, globalization was considered a good thing. Okay. The current trend is entirely different. I mean, people would just ship anything to China in 2005. If they could get it cheaper in China, they'd go there, or India, or anywhere, right? And it was just really, that was the calculation. It was assumed that it was going to be a totally globalized economy with no barriers or nothing like that. Now, nothing could be farther from the world we're in now. Now it's all about tariffs, barriers, suspicion of people who are not from around here, and all kinds of negativity about anything offshore. So, there's definitely a push to onshore more stuff for a variety of reasons. Okay, so I don't know if that's the biggest concern. Now, as far as like I don't think offshoring is your big threat right now. Your big threat is you got to ask yourself, what do I do that AI couldn't do better? Okay.
That's smart. Yeah. Because
Okay. I mean, that's who's going to replace you. It's not going to be the foreign worker. It's going to be the android. I don't mean the operating system. I mean, the android.
the Android, the
You know,
the robot you.
you asked me what I'm watching right now. I'm watching the HBO show Raised by Wolves, which involves two android parents raising a bunch of humans on some alien planet.
That's
So,
interesting.
pick your favorite robot dystopia, but that's definitely, we're going into one of them. I'm pretty
Go-
sure.
Okay, so that's good. So that makes sense. So you worry less about offshore, more about what AI can take, which is a good point because remember that what was it, GitHub Copilot or whatever that could write your code for you. GitHub wrote that thing, which is that's like the first step. I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah.
sure how good it was, but
No, I mean, basically, I think there's two categories of developers going forward: those that write the AI and those that are replaced by the AI. So, if I were you, I'd get on the side of writing the AI.
that's a good point because if you write the AI, then as soon as they start writing the AI, then you're done for. I think we're all gonna start ending if the AI can write itself. But here's another one. Renee asks, what if anyone is taking your class? What's one piece of advice they could use to succeed? So, what is the most useful advice for taking your classes in specific?
Where there's a will, there's a way. I mean, you want to pass the class, you need to do the work, and we'll throw you all kinds of assistance in getting the work. By the way, we have an amazing lineup of tutors in the Student Learning Center right now. Paul Nichols and Diana Kang are both top drawer. They're great, and they're available like 4 or 5 days a week in the Student Learning Center. I've got iBest co-instructors in my beginning classes, and I will offer my own tutorial sessions as needed. I'm delighted to answer student technical questions on email. So the help is there, right? The thing that the student has to bring is the shoe leather. I mean, I'm not going to say it's going to be easy to solve any of the programming challenges, but if you don't work at it, I can promise you won't solve any of the programming challenges. So, just bring the energy, and we'll bring the expertise, and hopefully you'll grind through it and get it done.
That's a good point because the tutors very, very helped me a lot during especially the third computer science class, and it was so useful because you could talk to people and they'd understand and help you, and it'd be a lot easier. And so I'm glad you mentioned that because that is a really good point. Make sure to go and get help if you need it because it's always someone can help you out.
Yeah, I mean, again, a lot of people have this myth of the lone coder in the dark basement who doesn't need anybody, and the person probably exists, but 99% of the code in the world is written by humans. Okay, so get used to talking with teammates, get used to having another pair of eyes on your code. I mean, I make assignments specifically, like the assignment in my 102 class just like yesterday was, before you turn this in, let somebody else look over your code and suggest improvements. You do the same for them, because that's a professional discipline in software. Team coding, pairs coding, quality assurance, the different development methodologies like Kanban and Agile or any of that stuff. It's all part of the game. You have to learn how to play as a team player.
That's good. That's some good advice. But I think we have time for at least one more question, and it is any plans on what tech you'll explore next? Anything you're interested in? You talked about Go, but I'm not sure how hyped you are about Go.
Yeah, I'm not going there. Well, I'm currently writing 2 Python classes. So one of them launches in the winter. So I wrote a couple lessons for that one today, and then I got a more advanced Python class in the spring. So I'm kind of locked into Python, whether I like it or not right now. Although I have to say that every time I research doing something in Python, the answers come pretty quickly. So it turns out it's a pretty handy little language. The thing I'm trying to wrap my head around the most right now is Docker. And Docker in general is pretty easy. But the thing that is kicking my rear end right now is getting Docker to share physical storage volumes on the server, so you can pass data back and forth between multiple Docker apps. And I've sort of got it to work, but not as fluently as I want to. So once I can get Docker app 1 to pass data to Docker app 2, I'm going to be in good shape. Then I'm going to have to figure out how to do all the Docker stuff on AWS, which they've got a lot of it, but I'm trying to get there. So that's probably my big challenge problem at the moment.
Oh, that makes sense because yeah, I swear when you say like, oh yeah, usually you can get stuff working like halfway, and like it kind of makes you can kind of get it working, and once you finally get it, that's the best. So it sounds like you like Python and Docker, your two.
Yeah. Now let me address a question from the chat. Renee is asking, how does my Python class, which is IT 111, Programming Fundamentals, how does that differ from CSC 110? Okay, well, CSC 110 has been around for a long time. It's very good. I know Bill's been involved with it. I'm sure he does an amazing job. It's a computer science class. So in devising IT 111, I asked myself, what would a computer scientist do? And I will do the exact opposite of that thing. So for example, there will be no treatment of math, zero math. We're not going to do any math. It's all going to be about handling text files. So it's going to be about turning JavaScript into Python, or turning HTML into Python, or getting Python to handle a CSV file. So it's all about data in, data out. Okay, so no algorithms, no heavy processing, no calculations, none of that stuff. It's all about, I've got data in this format and I need to transform it into some other format. And somebody sent me a file and I have to get this file onto my server, or I have to get this file off my server and get it onto the web. So it's very sysadmin flavored approach to Python. Plus, my stylistic touches, which, like I've already warned you, is I'm not going to hand you the answers to anything.
That's a good point, because I would say there's a lot of the Python or CSC 110 classes that have a lot of math and stuff. And it is that's interesting. You have a totally different aspect. You think it'd be similar, but it's good that it's different.
Python's an amazing math science language. Okay, I'm just not going to deal with any of that. What I'm working up to is the spring class is IT 112, which is web applications with Python. So when you get to the full 112 class, that has a Django framework to develop the HTML. We're going to use Postgres SQL on the back end. So you're going to have database calls. You're going to be running, you're going to have to build your server on Linux. So you've got some Linux command line stuff. We're going to be using an Nginx web server on the front end. So you've got to manage Nginx. Okay, so it's very kind of DevOps flavored, sysadmin flavored. Oh yeah, by the way, you're going to be running a full-scale web app on Python. So you're going to have user logins, passwords, data, queries, and you're going to have to create some kind of a front end. Although the front end can be totally ugly because that's the only front ends I ever do. But nevertheless, front end will exist. So, it turns out to do that, you've got to move your data in and out of different formats all the time. And you can't be a one-trick pony where languages are concerned. So, my 111 class is basically a bunch of warm-up activities so people can take the 112 class and not be totally freaked.
That's interesting. I kind of assumed that they would be really similar, but it sounds like they're actually totally different.
I think they're way different flavors. I think you take them both, quite honestly. In fact, we have several degree programs that require you to take both, so it's not much of a stretch. You want to graduate, you are taking both.
Huh? That's interesting. I think that's I didn't know that, so I'm glad you could mention that. So I think that is all our questions though. So unless you have something you want to say, or someone else has something in the chat, I think we're pretty much done. Do you have anything else you want to talk about?
Well, yeah, but take my classes, because that's where you're going to get all that stuff.
That's where you get all the information.
Thank you for having me on today. It's been a pleasure. And I would just encourage anybody to pursue your IT dreams. Again, it's a get rich slowly plan. So you're going to be the starving artist for a while. I can't predict if that's 1 year, 2 years, or 5 years, but at some point you've got an excellent chance to really make it big.
Oh, that's some good advice. So it sounds like if you really want to get a lot more, though, take your classes, see what you like, and get some more info that way, which is obviously pretty good advice. Thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. I really like doing these. They're really fun to get to know the teachers a little bit more. So I appreciate you coming on. I'm going to stop the recording, and I think that's it.